Hey everyone, and welcome to another devlog for ModMasks, a 3D action VR game that I'm solo developing. In the last devlog, I discussed the early prototyping phase where I was experimenting with creating different mechanics for the player controller. We have climbing, jumping, hand fireball key blast thingies, the ability to spawn swords wherever and whenever, enemies that attack us and can be killed, and of course, tossing a cannon out the window. These things are cool and all, but the magic of film editing is that I'm able to show off all of these features while hiding all of the bugs from you all. For example, the fireball hand only shoots out of the right hand, swords don't spawn with the left hand, swords don't spawn correctly if looking back on the x-axis, you get the idea. For the most part, I'm holding off on spending too much time making all these features working tightly as it is going to be an iterative process. I don't want to spend too much time grinding too much making one of these features perfect and then end up scrapping it later or needing to adjust the feature requirements because of something else unknown at this time in the process. My personal development process right now is a lot like sketching. Start with making a rough idea of what we will be creating to make sure it works as a whole, and then add details and polish later and keep polishing until it's done. That all being said, the bugs such as features that work in the right hand and not the left hand are not that big of a deal in my eyes at this time. I already created the process once, and I probably could design it better so nothing is hard-coded right versus left hand, but since the features are not even polished or functioning the way I want them to yet, it's okay for now. I know that what I have now is not going to be a roadblock for future development. However, out of all these bugs, there is one that is causing a roadblock that we need to address first, and that would be the jump. The way I created it for demonstration purposes is honestly not that acceptable for production. First off, I think the way that I'm using a fake platform to push the player up is incredibly hacky, but to be quite honest, as a solo developer for this project, I can't say I'm all that against being a bit hacky or writing some dirty code, as clean code is most beneficial when working in a team environment. If I write dirty code, I know I'm the one who's going to be eating it later. As long as there is good performance and I'm able to maintain it, that's okay in my books. When it comes to the jump, I need to do more testing to see if it's actually worth working with my hacked up solution. I whipped up a new scene that was a bit more close quarters than the previous valley scene. This one I'm calling the cave, which is intended to be the next area after the valley, hence the railroad track continuing to flow through, which will eventually lead deep into the mines. As you can see, I made the walls slanted so I'll be able to see how the jump behaves on them. I don't want the player to be able to cheese their way up the walls, but what I found was something I was not expecting. When jumping into one of these slanted walls, the fake platform actually gets stuck into the wall. This looks incredibly sloppy and I definitely do not like it. If anything, I would need to add some kind of trigger onto these walls to push the player back when they jump into the wall so they never get stuck. I made a little test wall and was able to get this working as intended, but it's definitely not bug free and I'm sure speedrunners would find ways to break out of my levels. Something I actually would love to happen, but I don't want to make it easy for them. Summoning Cell video someday, anybody? So what happened next was one of the most important things that's happened so far for this project. During these devlogs and social media posts I share about this game, I'm always asking for feedback. I'm taking this feedback very seriously as I'm trying to make this game as good as I possibly can, and I just want to make something that people actually want to play. I'm most likely not going to act on every single piece of feedback willy-nilly, but I am going to read each one and seriously take into consideration how it may possibly be able to help improve the game. I ended up seeing a post on the Indie Dev subreddit about someone about to launch their VR indie game. His story was strikingly similar to mine, so I reached out to him and told him how crazy I thought those similarities were. At the same time, I shot my shot and asked him if he could review some of my social media posts and devlogs to see if he could provide any feedback on my development process. I received encouraging words saying that I am exactly where I need to be, and we exchanged other dev-related talk. But he made a suggestion about my jump issue and suggested I check out using Hurricane VR instead of Autohands, as that framework had a built-in jump capability. I downloaded a free demo of this framework and tested it out, and it seemed to meet all the previous requirements I needed from the Autohands framework, but also had a solution for my jump problem. Because of this, I decided it'd be worth the investment to try to migrate all my features to the other framework. After all, I'm still early in the development process for this game, so it would honestly be irresponsible of me not to try out more than one framework before getting too deep into the project. Not only was I able to successfully port over all the modifications I've made to the Autohand framework over to the Hurricane VR framework, but most of these changes required less code, and I was able to address most of the previous bugs with little effort. I am not trying to start a framework war here, as I do believe both frameworks are very good and both have their own use cases depending on the type of VR application being created, but I think I'm going to have to go with the Hurricane VR, as I already have less work to do than if I went back to the Autohands solution. As you can see, now our player can jump into angled walls and bounce off as expected without the need to manually add triggers to each and every wall in the game. Now that our player movement, although still not perfect, is starting to feel like it's on the right path, I want to start to branch out into getting more detailed with more of the core game loop. The biggest one being the combat, as game feel is very important for this aspect as well. If it's not fun to battle enemies, then that's going to be a big part of the game that is not fun. Well, in order to have proper combat and for it to be an actual game, we need our player to actually be able to die. I made some more tweaks to the UI using a free curly UI extension package I found online, which I will link into the description below. It may be hard to see since recording in VR footage is still not all that great yet, but the top and the bottom bars are curved to try to represent the player wearing a helmet, and another curved UI that is displayed for the player health, which is always floating there like a HUD. So far, I've personally found this to be pretty comfortable while testing it, as it does not distract from the game view, and whenever I need to check my health, I can just look down with my eyes. I'm thinking this is going to be the general design we will work with from here on out, adding polish after we figure out how many elements will need to be displayed here. As for the enemy's health, before I had them dying after one hit, but we can do better than that. I implemented a gaze-based pointer from the headset so that when you look at an enemy, a UI icon appears above their head. The icon updates the color and the amount of bars that are shown for 100, 75, 50, and 25% until it reaches 0 when the enemy dies. I integrated a few more of their animations as well for when the enemy gets hit and dies. I have not updated the mask properly into the frames of these animations, as I do not intend for this current red mask you see to be the final version of the red mask. Once I get to that point, then I'll go through and update each of the animation frames. But for now, it is not a roadblock to continue on these other aspects of the game. A big issue at this point was I was only using a simple capsule collider for my enemy. This means you had to hit pretty much right in the middle of their body to do damage, and hitting their arms would do absolutely nothing. I grinded away at making more proper colliders to match the body of the enemy, and now this is starting to work properly. At this point, it was really hard to tell if the combat felt good or not. A big part of game feel is the audio and effects. Here's how it looks now when adding in some sword slashing sound effects and blood particles. Mixed with the animations, this is starting to feel pretty good. It could still use some tweaking, but I'm happy with it so far for this first pass. I had a couple buddies of mine playtest the previous Valley scene still using the Autohand framework, and both of them tried throwing the sword at the enemies and were met with some lackluster results. I too want to make the sword throwing feel better as well, kinda like throwing knives or kunai knives. I utilized my gaze-based controls that show the enemy's health UI when looking at an enemy. There's a focus bubble around the enemy so that it feels a bit more natural when looking at them, so you don't need the headset coordinates to be directly facing them 100%. When we have an enemy targeted and you throw a sword, it seeks towards that enemy and hits them. Right now, it's not really an aim assist, but an actual auto seek. So you can do these crazy curved shots, which are actually pretty fun. I think this actually makes our main character feel stronger, that he can just curve these swords and hit targets from crazy distances. Let me know what you think about this in the comments. After reworking the original enemy AI to target our new player controller and have their attacks do damage, we finally have a bit more intuitive enemy combat. I'm pretty happy with the progress that has been made up until this point with both the player controller and enemy UI. I feel like this is a good spot to wrap up this devlog, as next I want to get into a bit more detail with other aspects of the game loop, such as the level design. Let me know in the comments what you think of these systems so far, and if you have any suggestions or things you would like to see. Thanks, and see you next time.